In Snapshot 20W13A, a brand new block known as the Lodestone was introduced. It provided us with a great way of setting a waypoint in any dimension, which we can use with a compass to locate from any point in our world. And while it is definitely on the expensive side in a survival scenario, for creative builders it offers a great new way of designing brand new structures and sprucing up our worlds a tiny bit more. Before I get started, I realise this is going to be a pretty short video as they only added a single block, but I hope you enjoy the designs nonetheless. And our first design takes advantage of the new Lodestone block combined with the polished andesite block, and it's mainly used for floors and possibly also ceilings, but I prefer them for floors in this scenario. Now this is pretty expensive since it would require a netherite ingot for every single lodestone. However, in creative builds it would look really awesome. Now from a distance it definitely looks kind of 3D. I mean, the polished andesite kind of sticks out among the lodestone, especially since this edge here really combines well with the edge of the lodestone. But anyway, it's essentially just a really nice looking floor design. It's kind of bright and grey, and it just really works really well if you're looking for that kind of theme in your creative builds. Now my next design uses it as some kind of sundial, and this works really well as a way to hide it as your waypoint in your world, in your survival world, because it just disguises really well. It's barely noticeable, but it does look like quite a nice sundial, and it's something that could actually function in your world, but it still disguises it and it doesn't really stand out too well. It's just a great way of hiding it, but also finding your base really easily in your survival world. It just looks really nice, and even in a creative world it just adds a lot of detail, even though it is very expensive to make because it requires a single netherite ingot. Next up, we could have these ruins appearing around our world. Now these are pretty small ruins using just 3 or 4 blocks for each ruin, but it does use the lodestone right at the top just as a kind of detail, which works really nicely. You could use it with the polished basalt or the polished andesite, or even just the stone bricks, and it does work really nicely, just paired with some oak leaves or something, giving it a nice overgrown look, just scattered here and there around your world. Not too abundantly, but it is quite a nice looking design nonetheless. Next up, I've got a similar design that I used for also my target block video, and this is just a nice little more modern or contemporary style painting. Now I've used the stairs around it just to make use of the point where it meets, making a nice cross, and it's kind of like the glazed terracotta, but actually a really nice looking design. You could also use this in some kind of factory scenario because it does look a bit like a kind of gear or a motor without the black center in the middle. It just looks really nice and works really well as some kind of design in the wall. Now you don't really need this to be a school design, although I did think this worked best as the ceiling for a school in a creative build. Now these look like the tiles you typically find in some kind of laboratory or something, and right in the center we just have a normal class with desks and a whiteboard right in the center. But I really like the design for the ceiling. We've also got some kind of projector using redstone torches and levers, and overall it's just a really nice design for any kind of laboratory or classroom or something of that nature, even if it is once again very expensive and only really accessible to creative mode players. Next up, we've got some kind of statue or Easter Island head, and this utilises the lodestone as the eyes or something. Now, admittedly, it does look kind of weird from certain angles because it looks like it has an eye on the side or the front of its head, but it just allows for a nice creative way to have an eye on either side, and it is really a really nice simple way to utilise this. Now you could also actually have this as your compass waypoint and allow this to be the centre of your world. Now you may even want a much larger design just to make it a lot grander and a lot more creative a way of holding this block, but it just looks really cool and interesting and could fit in a number of scenarios, particularly in jungle biomes. And here we have a very simple city house, and I really like this design, but the main use of this is just as a way to break up the flow of the blocks in any kind of wall using the stone bricks. Now, once again, this is just incredibly simple. It's barely even a build hack, to be honest, but it's just a nice way of adding that extra bit of detail to a wall, just breaking up the flow or adding a pattern to it in your world. And as it goes with all of these designs pretty much, it is very expensive as a block, so if you're doing in this survival, you're probably very, very rich. Moving on, we actually have some kind of entrance to a nether hub or just a centre of your world, possibly an elven or contemporary style, and right in the centre, mixed with the polished diorite, the smooth quartz and the light blue concrete powder, we have the Lodestone just as the centre of the world spawn point, as a place for you to add your waypoint, and it's just a really nice, useful way of using the Lodestone. It just implements really well into the floor design, but it also looks just really nice and interesting in any kind of world. As we get near to the end, we're now going to be using the compass instead in some kind of item frame. So you could possibly have this as some kind of vehicle, possibly a spaceship design, and hidden somewhere in the front or anywhere ahead of the ship, you could have the Lodestone. Now, using the compasses in item frames, you can have dials pointing in whatever direction you like, so long as you place them relative to whichever Lodestone they're directed at. And it just looks really useful and really nice, like a proper functioning control panel for a spaceship or any other kind of futuristic vehicle, and it just works really well in a multitude of scenarios. You could possibly have some kind of vehicle as well that's crashed, and you could show it's run out of petrol or something using a dial like that to explain why it's possibly crashed. And finally, this is actually for more map creators or technical players, and it's just a way to point out where people should face their item frames. Now, you could have a series of lodestones along this point with a series of compasses just showing exactly which direction you could move these item frames. So as you may know, a comparator can detect the rotation value of an item frame. So as you can see here, it's only got a redstone signal of 1. When you rotate it, it has a signal of 2, 3, 4, and then it's activated. And as you can see, that goes alongside the value of the compass, which is pointing directly upwards. And you could have this in any kind of build, and it's just a nice way of pointing out which direction it should be facing. You could also use it as buttons for a combination lock and use these to point at which button they should press, so they just know which order to press which button. Anyway, that's it for all of these designs. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please, as usual, leave any suggestions down below. Once again, this is actually a much shorter video than normal because this is only one block, and I must admit, here and there I was stretching for some ideas on how to use this block, but I personally think these designs came out pretty well. Once again, it is a very expensive block, but if you're using it in some kind of creative world, or if you're just abnormally rich in your survival world, then go ahead and use any of these designs you want. It looks really awesome in a multitude of scenarios. I really love the top texture of the block, and the side texture is also really interesting. Anyway, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.